Stephanie Stanton says a few years ago she read Chris Hadfield's book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, one of the great book titles. And she says Hadfield mentions each of his professional iterations, that he loved his job so much he could kept doing it forever. And then a new incredible opportunity came along and he took it. Like, for reference, he was like in the military, and then he was a pilot, and then he decided if he wanted to be an astronaut, which was not something a Canadian could easily do, he should probably go to the Top Gun school, which was also not something that a Canadian often did, but he did go, and then he came in first in his class, and then he became an astronaut. Yeah, Hadfield's a unique mutant. But Stephanie Stanton says, I now have a role on a team I really enjoy, and my boss and friends and family have asked me, what's next? For the first time, I'm content to do this forever. And then the question is, in your professional life, how do you handle the contentment of your current role with preparing for and keeping an open mind about new opportunities? That's great, great question. So I'm just going to say that your question also has an answer. How do you handle the contentment of your current role with preparing for and keeping an open mind about new opportunities? I will say my answer is you handle the contentment of your current role by keeping an open mind. But you're asking how. It's not... Our life comes in waves. It's not static and it's not constant. It does this, right? And so when you're content in a role, it's not like you're in a valley, but you're in a stasis. And a stasis, like a crisis, they are both liminal states. They're both between things, right? Like stasis doesn't sound like it's between things, but like stasis is going to be broken by crisis. So I felt this. When I first got to ILM, when I first got to Industrial Light and Magic, it was 1998. I was in my early 30s. I felt like I'd died and gone to heaven. I had been prepared. I didn't quite realize that I'd been preparing my whole life to be there. And then I got there and it was even better than I thought it could have been. And I spent 2 whole years just kind of floating. And it was hard to let go of that, what's next, what's next. But it wasn't there. It wasn't showing up. I was, as you say, just like perfectly content. And then okay, so my tenure at ILM is fairly short. It's 1998, mid-98 to late 03. Yeah, it's like 4.5, 5 years. And about halfway in there, about 2.5, 3 years in, I realized that was V dropping. I was about 2.5, 3 years in, and I realized that, oh, I kind of want a little more than this. Yeah, it was mostly just like, I had built some spaceships. I had done sort of a whole bunch of the things I had always wanted to do. On a Star Wars movie, I'd been in a meeting with George. I'd seen some incredible things. I'd built some things. I'd solved problems for Academy Award winners. I'd been thanked directly for it. Like, everything was amazing. And in dealing with the art department, that's, I think, what happened is, as I matured in the shop at ILM, I started spending more time working directly with my art director or my production designer, getting more freedom, getting more latitude. And once I started to really be wheeled into the big picture, I found that I wanted more of the big picture. That's literally how it happened in my head. It was like, I want to play at a bigger scale than this. Like, this is really great, but it is a specific scale doing this kind of model making, and I would like to expand that. And I remember saying that to somebody at the time, and getting dragged for it a couple days later at Friday Beers. I mean, this person I told, yeah, here's how this happened. Around that time, it was announced that ILM was going to move to the Letterman complex in the Presidio in San Francisco. And I still knew that was 2 or 3 years away, but I said to this coworker, I'm not sure that I'll be here when it moves over there. And they were like, where will you be? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just kind of interested in playing at a bigger scale than this. Literally, that's how I said it. Cut to Friday Beers. He pays me out. He like tells everyone, Adam thinks he's going to go off and, save the world or something. He like really trashed me about it. I didn't take that personally. That's fine. But so what I want to say to you then, Stephanie, is enjoy the contentment in your current role and keep on looking at what you're doing and asking if it's really still as enjoyable. Because my assumption is, as people, it's this, but it's also this on an upward trajectory. I really do think that the older we get, the smarter we get. We get to know ourselves better. We get to know each other better. We get better at taking care of each other. I view all of this, everything that we're talking about, everything I've ever said or done on this channel, all exists under the rubric of a process of self-discovery. Because in my opinion, in order to get good at something and to get better at something, you have to get past the biggest obstacle, which is your own dumb brain. And when you do that by learning how it works and not tricking it, but just like getting past that. So again, that stasis is temporary. The stasis and contentment you feel, it's always temporary, because I think as humans, we're natural explorers. I want to talk about liminal spaces for a second. Liminal is such a beautiful word. Liminal spaces means an in-between space. I was in a liminal space for at least 6 months after I wrapped Mythbusters. I wasn't doing the next thing. I wasn't doing the old thing. I was sort of in the midst. And Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, is a poet from the turn of the 19th century, a wonderful, wonderful poet who at one point corresponded with a young poet. And Rilke's letters, Rilke's half of that correspondence is published in a book called Letters to a Young Poet. One of my favorite books, one of the most seminal books for me, and like a little chapters in my head about how to think about the world. And one of them is he talks to his young poet about the young poet has, been broken up with, and he's really sad. And Rilke says, I'm going to paraphrase this, but I'm trying to get it close. Rilke says, I think we find all of our moments of sadness terrifying because we are standing in a place we can't remain standing, that liminal space. He says, the past has left us and is no longer part of us, but the future has not yet taken hold. And here we are in this place without a past and not yet with a future. And Rilke then counsels, this is why, he says, it is so important to be, quote, lonely and attentive when one is sad. Now, the translation I have says lonely and attentive. They don't all have that. I favor a particular version of the translation. I'm going to try and find it after this live stream and put it up on Twitter or X or whatever. We find ourselves standing in a place we cannot remain standing, and this is why he says it is so important to remain lonely and attentive when one is sad, because that is the moment when the future takes hold on you. And I believe that I have proven that to my satisfaction for myself. And I don't just say when one is sad, but whenever one is, I view it as really vital part of the process that I do, is that I am lonely and attentive at those moments that are transitional. And I'm attentive to what's working, what's not working, how it feels. And Rilke, I really love this idea. He says the future takes hold in you there. It's like this shell that you're building comes around you. Rilke then points out that at some point in the future, there'll be a quote, noisy and fortuitous time the future seems to come from outside. But he's right, I think, that the groundwork happens there. So, Stephanie, just be lonely and attentive in that job you are super content with, and do a fantastic job at it, and keep doing a fantastic job at it, but keep asking yourself, is this enough? That's a really, really wonderful and vital question. And it's our luxury to be able to ask that and answer no. That is a key grace if you are able to do that. Good luck. Oh, there's one other thing about complacency that I wrote at the top of this, and it's about Milton Glaser. Oh, that's a call I will look forward to having later. Milton Glaser was an incredibly important American graphic artist. I Heart New York. Arguably the very first emoji is Milton Glaser's creation out of whole cloth and a gift to New York it was. He never saw a penny from the I Heart New York campaign. Milton worked with and for my dad back in the early days, back when they were madmen in the late 50s and 60s in New York City. And Milton, literally, I mean, if you want to Google him, it's astounding, the breadth of his and depth of his brilliance through latter 20th century advertising art. And he has this wonderful piece that I found a few years ago about how when you get really successful at something, it's what people are going to keep asking you to do. And so there's a point at which you're going to be confronted with continuing to do this thing because you're successful at it, even though you don't want to do it anymore. And that actually, the better you get at stuff and the more that happens, the more it's going to happen. And Milton, who taught for decades, told his students, you've got to embrace moving on from your successes to the next thing. It is vital to do that because you don't want to be asked to keep doing the same thing for a new client. Because it's not intellectually challenging, it's not creatively challenging. And when it's not challenging in those ways, you're not going to turn out work that sings to you. And work that sings to you can totally surprise you. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. I talk about here on the channel how I build stuff, and when I'm really clicking with building stuff, I'll take a picture of it at the end of the day and I'll go home and I like moon through pictures on my phone of what I have built. I forgot to look at live questions during this because I had Do Not Disturb turned off. Anyway, I'll moon through questions. And lately I've been gussying up the tested offices, and I was going home at night and mooning over photos of the offices, and I realized, oh, this is exactly that. This is my creative endeavor right now, is cleaning up these offices. Haha, Austin Squire asks a great question. As a freelancer, have you ever had a client who employed a company you worked for try to employ you directly? Yes, I have. How do you cut out the middleman without sacrificing the relationship? You don't. You don't cut out the middleman. I just mean it's not cut and dry. So it happened to me on Home Alone 3, where one of the key supervisors asked me if I'd be willing to build a side project while I was building stuff under full-time employment for Jamie. And I just went right to Jamie and I was like, dude just asked me if I wanted to build this thing. Jamie was like, all right, go do it if you want to. He didn't take it personally, which was one of the ways in which Jamie was a phenomenal boss and a phenomenal freelancer. But as a freelancer, everything is about your relationships. And that goes both ways. If a client is really terrible, stop working for them. It's not, their money isn't worth it. That can really be the case. I think I said that even last week. But you don't burn those bridges lightly, and you can burn them quickly. You can burn them quickly. Honestly, there were times when I was working in shops where a client stopping to speak to me at my desk could cause my boss to scream at me. So you got to be really careful with that stuff. I will say that after I stopped working full-time for Jamie, a commercial director called me up and said, I'd like to go with you instead of going with Jamie because I think it'll be less expensive. I'm like, fair enough. They don't have a duty to go get Jamie to bid on jobs. The funny thing was, maybe you see where this is going, I bid for Jamie. So I just bid the job for them the way I would have bid it for Jamie. And they paid me exactly what I think they would have ended up paying Jamie, but they thought they were getting out cheaper. The perception mattered. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us even further, you can by becoming a tested member. Details are, of course, below, but it includes all sorts of perks, and we're building them all the time. You get advanced word and behind-the-scenes photos of some of our projects. Questions, you get to ask direct questions during my live streams, and we have some members-only videos, including the Adam real-time series of unbroken, unedited shots of me working here in the shop. They are weirdly meditative. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one.